I'll tell him the truth. She has already opened her mouth and gathered her strength to get help. Maybe they will believe her. The man was writing down the protocol, and before she could start pouring out her soul, she was asked if she could lie. A man in military uniform sternly reported that her file contained slightly different information, namely that she was a capable fraudster, distinguished by her eloquence, knew how to negotiate, and had high intelligence. The girl smiled widely, thinking that the dialogue should be conducted with extreme caution, did not blurt out too much, and innocently said that she had never lied and did not know how to lie. The ship Vish plowed the ocean and headed for the island. The man looked at the smiling girl, wondering who he had to work with. From her appearance, you could say that she was innocence herself, but she was a repeat offender. Then he answered her that the same words about the fact that she had never lied and did not know how to sound from her lips during the resentencing. She smiled even wider, saying that he forgot to mention that these words came from her lips during the arrest. Looking at her calmly, he asked her name in order to write it down in the protocol. The girl impudently did not take her eyes off his eyes and chuckled. Why ask such questions? Looking at the brave hero and celebrity, the girl had the thought that he was certainly not from some outback. Still smiling, she asked a question in response to the question. Is there really someone else who doesn't know her name? To which the man dryly said that these are the rules. He must ask. The girl said Rosen Walker. Then she noticed that this name was correct, but the irritated man told her that he didn't care about her name. He needed to include in the documents the name that she said with her mouth. Still looking, he monotonously said that the name indicated in the document was needed for verification. The young woman's eyes became sad, and she slowly, as if squeezing out with pain, said Rosenhauers. Rosen remembered leaflets falling from the sky with the image of the one who was now sitting in front of her. Wow, how fate brought her together with this war hero. And when the voice came on the radio, everyone raised their heads up. We were fascinated by him, she thought. The government chose the hero perfectly. The young, noble pilot was ideal for the image of the ideal hero for the masses. She was thinking about that hero, Ian Connor, when his increasingly impatient voice demanded the name of the charge. What an accusation, Rose said in bewilderment, her hands cuffed in iron shackles going numb. He chewed on her words, saying that she needed to name the reason why she was heading to Monty Island, to the worst prison on Earth. The girl replied that the reason she was sent there was that she ran away 2 times, trampling the pride of the Imperial Army. He clarified her initial accusation for which she was arrested. The girl still answered that she was innocent. He coldly told her that this was a formal procedure, and he was not interested in her opinion. Rosen, without blinking or moving her gaze, still repeated her innocence, to which Ian replied, "And what kind of criminal would say that he is guilty?" The girl spoke about God, who knows the truth, to which the man, starting to lose his temper, reminded once again that no one is interested in her opinion. At that moment, a young man ran into the office and shouted what he was doing. It was so unexpected that Rosen and Ian froze, not knowing what to answer, until finally Ian said what was obvious to everyone, that he was having a personal conversation with the criminal. The man hesitated and explained that this was not Ian Connor's work. There were other people for this. This criminal needs increased attention. The interrogation should be carried out by the person responsible for transportation. The man glanced sideways at the criminal, and he continued to broadcast that the most notorious criminals were sent to the island, to which the girl, grinning, continued calling herself a witch from Al-Kafez, and a famous one at that. When the guy continued to convince the boss that it was dangerous to be alone with such a dangerous person, Ian pointed to the yawning Rosen and asked if it seemed dangerous to him. The subordinate did not let up. He looked at the girl with fear and said that even though she looks like an ordinary ragamuffin, she escaped from Al-Kafez. She should not be underestimated. When the guy reminded her about her case, the girl finished for him by saying that she was charged with the murder of her husband when she was 17 years old. Ian ordered the criminal to be taken away. The guy took her arm. The girl still insisted on her innocence. When they led her, she thought that compared to the previous guards, these gentlemen would have swung a military boot at her long ago. But still, he is a guard, and she is a criminal, like a cat and a mouse. Once she relaxes once and they catch her, then it will definitely be the end. But she is a specialist in finding loopholes for escape. She examined the warden more than once and saw where the keys to the cell hung. This key stood before Rosen's eyes. It is not just a key, but a path to freedom. Rosen was led through the hall where the party was taking place. Her escort asked if the party was over. Yes, the event had come to an end. The man was told how he would lead the witch through the gentlemen. But he said that these same gentlemen were sailing on a liner on an excursion to the prison. So, in his opinion, they would be interested in seeing the witch in person. The girl watched in surprise at the bottles and confetti lying around. Everything for her was like their other reality. After the war, a lot changed. Ships intended for military purposes were converted into passenger ships after the end of the war, like this liner on which Rosen was transported. Not so long ago, this liner transported injured passengers, but now it has turned into a place for luxurious parties. Our heroine realized that the island of Monte is considered so disastrous that if you save your life there, this is already an achievement, so she must escape at any cost. While her overseer was talking about how if the gentlemen saw her smelling so bad, it would only cause a commotion. So that's right. There's no point in looking at her. Rosen found something to answer, saying that during the war, they themselves looked no better than her. Ian turned to Rosen's leading man, calling him Henry, and asked him not to waste his strength on the criminal who killed her husband. But he did not let up, saying that Sir Connor should not let his guard down. This woman could really be a witch. The girl was brought onto the deck. The first stars appeared in the sky. Ian told Rosen that he wanted to show her something. Rosen looked into the distance at the ocean, and it was so beautiful that she could not take her eyes off. The moon was bright, shining with a silvery light, leaving a trail on the water. Our heroine thought that she had to become a world-famous criminal in order to see such beauty. She never thought that in her entire life she would see something beautiful. She was brought out of oblivion by the voice of Sir Connor, who clarified that her method of escaping from Alcafez was done using a tunnel. The girl confirmed. Then he clarified whether it was true that she walked over the cliff naked, to which Rosen replied that he was waiting for detailed descriptions of her actions. But she was struck by the words of the warden that people said that she used magic during her escape. She thought that she would no longer be surprised by the rumors about herself and her adventures, but she realized that she was mistaken. The last successful escape from Alcafez was made by a witch 36 years ago, and therefore the press also dubbed Rosen a witch after her escape. People are afraid of those things that they cannot understand. Here is the era of science, the girl thought. Traces of the past, mysticism, mystery. Everything unidentified are not so easy to erase, even with scientific progress. Rosen answered directly. Unless if she were a witch, she would be standing in front of him now, shackled. The presence of a witch on this ship does not seem absurd to him. The girl shook her cuffed hands in front of them and smiled bitterly, meaning she was a witch. Henry said that Ian shouldn't believe her. Only lies come out of this woman's mouth. It's worth remembering one dossier where she shed tears and almost spent the entire empire. Rosen grinned and called out to Henry, declaring that if she really were a witch, she would sew his mouth shut. She laughed, saying, "What other facts are needed? Is it really possible to be so stupid?" She even carried out a procedure to identify abilities, which did not confirm anything. Rosen really found it both funny and painful how she was surrounded by ridiculous speculation. Henry lost his temper and approached and wanted to hit Rosen, calling him rubbish. But at that moment, Ian stopped him and ordered him to take his hands off the prisoner, threateningly promising that he would report to his superiors if this happened again. The man looked at Henry, and with all his appearance demanded immediate obedience to the order. Henry, not expecting such a turn, began to fuss, trying to object to something. Rose made an offended face. Ian turned to the girl and reported her nickname of the most famous fugitive of the empire and the witch Al-Khazef. Rosen was taken aback by such an official address. Ian then continued in an official tone that whether she lies or not, he doesn't care at all. She is a prisoner who was sentenced to life on Monte Island. Escorting to the island is his goal and order from above, and she is not the first to escape from Alcafez. Then he added in an icy voice that no one had ever managed to escape from Monty Island, not even the witch. His words seemed to be sealed and paralyzed the will. A feeling of hopelessness appeared in Rosen. He spoke calmly, coldly, clearly, as befits a warden. Politely kills morale, Rosen thought, but they should definitely have the keys to the lifeboat and the handcuffs. She kept her eyes on the ring of keys hanging on Ian's belt. If she wanted to escape, then this really needed to be done before arriving on the island. Henry returned and showed that he had brought what Sir Connor asked for. Rosen looked at what the man brought. Ian saw that at the moment the prisoner was simply watching with interest. The next minute, a tray with raw meat appeared in front of our heroine. The girl looked at the red meat pieces in bewilderment. Ian told her to watch carefully. Our heroine tensed, not understanding what he was going to do. A second later, the warden threw pieces of meat overboard. She still did not understand what he wanted to show her by this. Then he said to look down at the water, what waters they were floating on, what she was seeing now. The meat thrown overboard went down, leaving purple traces of blood that remained on it. Henry, calling her a witch, rejoiced and urged her to look further. She would be interested. Bloody stains and huge backs of sea creatures appeared, judging by the shadows they left, showing their gigantic size. The girl watched as sea monsters circled around the ship, and Henry added contentedly that she really had nowhere to run. Ian, pointing to the keys, added that if he wants to become a snack for the sea monster, then he should take a boat and go on a journey. He approached Rosen, pointed to a bunch of keys, and said that she apparently really wanted to get them. He was now mocking her. He was cruel and cold. Looking into his eyes, Rosen thought that he was no gentleman. The girl understood that it couldn't have been any other way. How could the warden behave differently? She stood opposite him and peered into his face, and thought that this was also the face from the leaflets. But he did not look at all like himself, like a different person. I don't know about others, but he clearly doesn't stand on ceremony with her. He wants to break her will. He makes it clear in every possible way that she is doomed. When she saw the prison cells of the liner, she felt like a rat. Rosen was overcome by difficult thoughts about whether she really could not escape from here. Her cellmate brought her out of her thoughts and asked her to tell her everything. The girl shrugged her shoulders and replied that there was nothing to talk about. The cellmate hinted at a personal meeting with Ian, but our heroine made it clear that she was hinted that there was nowhere to run. Everything was banal. While the neighbor was asking if he had said something else, a charming blue-eyed baby dropped in on them. Rosen did not understand what Maria expected from her. She explained that Rosen was young and attractive. Next, she explained to her friend in detail that she was young and attractive and was left alone with a handsome man. When Rosen realized what the neighbor was getting at, she said that nothing had happened and could not have happened. Well, even if we assume that she tries to seduce him, her ragged appearance clearly will not inspire him. Maria, smiling, offered to attack him, reminiscent of the incident in Al-Cafez. Rosen replied seriously that the problem is not only Ian Connor, but also that the ocean is actually teeming with marine predators. As she uttered these words, the girl's voice trembled, as if she was trying to justify the impossibility of the attempt. Maria put her hand on the shoulder and looked into the girl's eyes, asking if she was about to give up. Maria from Al-Cafez was heading to the island with Rosen. She had all the power inside. If someone did not like her, then she did not live to see the end of her term, and the guards could do little or interfere with her internal domain. When Rosen was brought to Al-Cafez, she managed to become famous for one escape. She was scratching her spoon on the plate in despair, and then Maria approached her, asking that she intended to wake up all the guards. Whether her popularity played into Rosen's hands, or whether there was personal sympathy, she and Maria became friends. Everyone treated her well because Maria patronized her. Then the girl did not understand what was the matter. But at that time, prison life was quite calm. When Maria persistently demanded to know whether Rosen was about to give up, the girl understood what her neighbor wanted from her. She looked into Rosen's eyes with some kind of frenzy, and our heroine realized that they needed her victory. They need her to demonstratively trample the pride of the Imperial Army, erase any traces. This is a kind of ideology. She is their idol. Probably to some extent it gives them the strength to live on. Rosen replied that of course not. She was not going to give up, and she should know this very well. The girl looked her neighbor resolutely in the eyes and repeated that she would never give up. She was their idol and would not let her down. Miria smiled contentedly and said that this was a good decision. Then she offered to smoke, which confused Rosen as to how she even got cigarettes. They smoked, and Rosen started talking about Ian. What was he even doing here? Wasn't he a pilot? Such a person with a bunch of awards should hold an important position in the government. She thought maybe Maria knew something, but she, taking a drag from her cigarette, replied that she had no idea. Then she suggested that he might have been injured and demoted, but Rosen denied this assumption. Physically, he looks fine. Maria noticed that when she says the word crippled, she does not mean physical injury. When Rosen asked to explain, the woman raised a finger to her temple. Realizing what the neighbor was hinting at, the girl snorted, asking him not to talk nonsense. But she, without being offended, replied that she didn't really care what happened to him. Maria added that the main thing for them was to pick it up in order to get out of here. But Rosen believed that this only works on the brainless. The girl reasoned out loud. Well, let's say she steals the key. She can only get out by water. The lifeboat has no engine, and there is no other one here. Taking a drag from her cigarette, she added that the problem is not even just monsters. She imagined herself theoretically floating in a rubber boat without food and water. She could not withstand, if not monsters, then hunger and thirst. While reasoning, she heard something being thrown on the floor. She did not understand who or what was distracting her. Looking up, she was stunned to see a baby with a ball. Her first thought was what the child was doing here. Rosen asked out loud how the child came down here. Maria's answer almost made her faint when she innocently replied that this girl brought her cigarettes. She shouted to the girl that she couldn't walk here, where her parents were. The girl looked at her with huge blue eyes, and instead of leaving, she approached the camera. Carrying a pink ball in front of her, the girl stomped towards them. The girl said hello and introduced herself as Lyla Revel, to which Rosen jumped. She asked the girl if she happened to know Henry Revilla. The child replied that this was her uncle. In the tone of a teacher, the girl said that this was not a playground to play, but noted that the girl was completely different from her uncle, and that made her happy. The girl, pouting her lips and upset, quietly said that she promised her friends that she would meet Rosen Walker here. Rosen cheerfully asked if she knew who it was. The girl happily replied that this was the most famous fugitive in the Empire and a witch. Lyra said that this is what people on the ship say about her, and her grandfather is the captain of the ship, and she said that she would meet Rosen Walker, but no one believes her. The girl happily said that she had come to the right place. She was Rosen Walker. Henry complained about the work, which was a headache, and cursed this damn fugitive. Ian advised him to think of this task as a vacation. Look at the money people pay for this excursion. Henry grumbled that people are crazy. They are all bored. Only the war is over. To which Ian laughed, saying that the war has made Henry an old man. After a pause, he said that this witch from Alcafez was also from Rioritten. These words had an effect on Ian. His face changed. Before the eyes of Ian Connor, this city appeared in fire and smoke. This is how he saw it then for the last time. Henry said that it seems she lived on the outskirts of the city until she killed her husband. He added that he just wanted to warn him so that Sir Connor would know. He nodded that he knew this. Henry noted that he had specifically written this down in the report. Ian spent his youth in Rioritten. There was a military school there. His youth passed. There he first boarded a plane and took off into the sky. During the war, the city was bombed. Henry noted that the luck of the prisoner Rosen was even annoying. She did not die, but got out of this city. He continued, became a real celebrity, and is heading to the island of Monte under your personal leadership. Ian reminded her that he was waiting for her on Monte Island. He nodded and said that he knew, and still. He remembered that nightmare, and tears welled up in his eyes. Monte Island or not, she was alive, but his beloved sister was not. He remembered her medallion, and the events of that day were reproduced and struck with renewed force. Incredible anger at Rosen clouded his mind. He remembered her in that photo holding little Lyla. How beautiful she was. Lyla Revel exclaimed in admiration when she heard that it was Rosen Walker herself. The girl, excited with delight, began to rattle about whether it was true that she was digging with a spoon, as they wrote about in the newspapers. and whether witchcraft was also true, Rosen did not have time to nod. Rosen clarified the girl's name and leaned towards her and said that she wanted to ask something. The girl tensed as Rosen looked into her eyes with all seriousness. Our heroine smiled and said, if Lyla answers her question, she will show magic. The girl didn't know what to do. Her grandfather forbade her to fulfill the prisoner's requests. Rosen hinted that if she didn't answer, we wouldn't see magic. Maria watched this picture with curiosity. The girl reassured the little girl by saying that she wouldn't ask anything like that. She was just curious about something. When the girl agreed, Rosen asked if she knew Ian Connor, to which the girl reported that he was her uncle's boss, a war hero. Rosen ingratiatingly asked if he was close with Lyla. The girl made an offended face and said that she was not at all. Lyla remembered how her uncle told her that Ian seemed cold, but in fact he was kind and loved her because he had known her since she was in her mother's belly. She also added that he told her to consider Ian another uncle. The girl plunged into those memories and added that she was somehow not sure about it. Rosen's eyes sparkled and she began to ask whether Sir Connor had a lover or wife. The girl didn't understand what it meant to have a girlfriend or not, but she confidently answered that she didn't have a wife and, unlike other adults, he didn't think about it at all. Rosen asked if the girl had seen women entering Sir Ian's room or being alone with someone. She batted her eyes and honestly answered that she had never seen such a thing. And having collected herself, the girl seriously asked, drawing out her words, whether Sir Connor was a very compassionate person. The girl innocently replied that she did not understand the meaning of this word. Rosen exhaled and did not know how to explain, but Maria came to the rescue. Maria explained the meaning of this word using associative examples to make it easier for the girl to navigate. Rosen looked carefully at her neighbor and was surprised at how cleverly she could choose examples. Maria gave an example of a puppy in the rain and feeling sorry for it, or when you start crying when you see someone else crying. Rosen involuntarily thought about Maria's words, not even knowing what to add. The girl smiled joyfully and said that they meant love. Rosen exhaled with relief, sweating profusely, smiled back and confirmed. Maria countered her by asking since when do witches get nervous and break into a sweat. Rosen, remembering Ian and his demeanor, noticed that he was not one of those who could simply love someone. But the girl began to defend him, although she agreed with Rosen's words that Uncle Ian was still very good. Rosen thought how naive this girl was, and said out loud that she had heard enough. Now it was her turn to show magic. For magic, she asked Lyla for some small thing. The girl gave her a coin. Rosen took it in her palm, without taking her eyes off the baby, and carrying out manipulations, told the girl that magic is a special power. Holding her hand in front of her wide-open eyes, she added that magic should always have intermediaries, showing an empty palm in which a few seconds ago there was a coin. The girl, impressed by such a miracle, screamed that the coin had disappeared, but Rosen reached out to her ear, and the next second she took out a coin from behind her ear, giving it to the happy girl as a talisman. Rosen winked mysteriously and said that at sunset the coin would turn golden, and the girl should not tell anyone about it. Otherwise, the magic would dissipate. Maria asked Rosen if she really used magic. She just grinned and said that it was just a trick. Later, Lyla would figure it out. Maria looked and said, wasn't she the one who claimed that she couldn't lie? But then she agreed that if she were a real witch, she would not be shackled. Maria said that she had heard about a place called Witch Island, but no one knows whether it actually exists. Then she laughed and said that Rosen herself must already know about him. Rosen listened to her neighbor with her eyes closed. She continued to say that according to rumors, this island is not far from Monte. Opening her eyes, Rosen added that is it really possible for an ordinary person to get there just like that, and they are unlikely to be happy with her and greet her with shouts of hooray. Maria said that she was just joking, then seriously added that it is easier to deceive children by pressing on pity. She suggested trying this method on the commander. Why not try it? Rosen replied doomedly that apparently there were no other options left. The plan was to use the noble hero and get a compassion ticket from him, and such methods worked on idiots, but they wouldn't work on Ian Connor. However, he is a military pilot and also a war hero, the complete opposite of me, Rosen thought. He is surrounded by an aura of admiration, glory, adoration. His life is a series of victories. The girl thought about herself, how she dreamed of achieving his goal, but became a pitiful and trampled creature. Of course, the feeling of superiority over someone is much sweeter when someone depends on you. With sadness, Rosen completed the mental dialogue that feelings of pity are easier to achieve than love. Love is completely different. At this time, Ian was thinking about what Henry said. Everything would be fine with him, but from time to time, something like this would happen. He remembered the words of one girl who said that sometimes Henry's feelings would rush out, and it was not clear to whom they would be felt. She advised Ian to just listen to his friend. You just need to give appropriate answers until this is over. Ian stood thoughtfully looking ahead into the darkness, his mental dialogue interrupted by Henry. Henry looked at Ian with some concern and said out loud that they had been here for too long. It was time to go inside. As they walked, Henry was indignant. How could a war hero be forced to transport a prisoner witch? But Connor replied that an order is an order. Henry was in awe that Sir Connor would still be promoted to a high post after this work. He continued to encourage Ian, saying that he was a hero. Only the pathetic nobodies of Raya could hate him. Ian just listened. He was accused of failing to protect Ryoton, so now they want to demonstrate how this witch is punished. He understood that they wanted him to show how he was taking this rubbish who had escaped from Raya to the island. Then they would turn a blind eye to the loss and begin to applaud him again. This is just a show that should go without blemishes and flaws. Henry told him that as soon as he finished with this work, he should definitely rest and live for himself. He wanted to hear from Ian's own lips that after all this was over, a brilliant path would await Sir. Ian wondered what this brilliant path meant for himself. He became aware of this concept after the end of the war, while walking through the Arc de Triomphe in his full military uniform. People threw flowers at him and shouted his name, wondering if he himself was happy. He tried to remember with what face he walked through the triumphal arch, but he could not. The memories seemed to be layered. He was supposed to smile, but he couldn't even remember whether it was a smile, and if so, whether it was convincing. It is impossible to protect everyone. There is no absolute victory, and you are not a god, he heard at the end of his thoughts from Henry. He added that everyone knows that a commander must always choose the lesser of two evils, and Rosen Walker should not be ignored. Henry offered to take over all duties associated with her, but Ian assured him that he would deal with her himself, and Henry himself needed to focus on restoring his strength. He looked at Sir Connor's tired face and assured that it was not his fault. At that moment, all aviation strategies were a complete sick gamble. And he added that if it weren't for Commander Connor, everything would have collapsed. But Ian remembered the faces of the dead and thought, if he is not to blame for their deaths, then who is responsible? When he was tasked with escorting prisoners to Monty Island, the boss told him to especially keep an eye on Rosenwalker. Rosenwalker, that name couldn't get out of his head. Or Rosenhauos. He had seen her on the front pages of the newspapers, the famous fugitive from Raya and the only survivor. Ian stood over the newspaper with Rosen's picture and remembered Henry's words. She was the only one who survived. Afterwards, Rosen was brought to him, but he didn't hear her and remembered her conversation with Henry, newspaper reports. And then the girl called out to him loudly. Why did he call her if he wasn't listening? Folding her arms across her chest, she displeasedly asked if he had listened to her. He perked up and looked at the girl with some fear and squeezed out that he was listening. Then she decided to continue, touching on the topic of sharks. But he sarcastically quipped that she should know the diet of sharks well. The girl got angry. What kind of person is he? He wants to crush him mentally. She jumped up and leaned towards him, shouting for him to stop. And she added that she understood the lecture that it would be stupid to run away. But with lectures about sea monsters, you also need to know when to stop. When asked if he thought she was an idiot, Ian calmly added that the difference between an idiot and a hero was just a piece of paper. Both the idiot and the hero do not think about the consequences. But then he instructively added that if you think with your head, you can avoid doing anything stupid. The girl defiantly asked if he meant that now she was not on friendly terms with her head. He noted that he can call her brave. but many probably take her for a dark heroine. The girl, in turn, asked whether she was an idiot or a heroine for him. He thought and replied that according to his criteria, she was an idiot for escaping. Seeing that Rosen was starting to boil, he asked her not to get excited. The girl commented on his answer, which means she should have quietly served 50 years. In her opinion, this is much dumber. She tried to look at his reaction, trying to find the key. She asked what she thought she should have done. He calmly began to say that when the initial sentence was passed, he had to admit guilt. Then he would have received mitigation. And if she had behaved decently in prison, she could have applied for early release or a transfer to a prison with better conditions. Yeah, she would have died, then Rosen said smugly. She recalled what happened to the city of Ryo-Ryton. He didn't know what to answer. The girl decided to remove the painful issue and continued her reasoning. Why should she rot for 50 years? And murder is given from 8 to 50 years. That's how it's written in the law. Okay, well, let's say she couldn't stand it and killed. Let's just assume why she's 50 years old, and the man who lived next door to her and beat his wife to death at just 8 years old. Ian pointed his finger at her and said that this was also spelled out in the law. He nodded at the books, but the girl said that she couldn't read. He said that he knew about it. Sir Connor stood over her and said that everything was written in the law, and she was now sentenced to life imprisonment on the island of Monte. Looking into his condemning and coldly looking at her eyes, the girl involuntarily grew cold, after which he, as a judge, repeated that it was only her own fault and that he had been lenient towards her for too long. This outraged Rosen. She jumped up, but he categorically added that the personal conversation was over. He ordered her to get up and move towards the exit. The girl feverishly thought that if she left with nothing, then this would all just happen again. Thinking about how to catch his attention and that this was her last chance, the girl nervously tried to say something. But what? What can attract the attention of Ian Connor? Then she blurted out that he is just like her. The man stopped without saying anything, turned to Rosen standing behind him. The girl said that he was also an idiot. He asked what she called him. Our heroine bravely answered the same way he called her just recently. Looking into his eyes, she continued repeating his words that one sheet of paper separates a hero from an idiot. So aren't they the same? He is a light hero, and she is a dark one, and both are idiots. He was really hooked by these words. How they differ. No one believed in victory in the war, a small country that pompously has the name of an empire, while Talus has already captured several states. He listened as she talked about victory and what was gained from this victory. Broken people lying in ruins, destroyed cities, and himself, who was dressed in a beautiful uniform and called a hero. And now you are escorting pathetic prisoners, and the question is why he does such work. They stood opposite each other. He held her by the chain of her shackles. The words had an effect. He began to light up with rage, something that Rosen wanted. Finally, he yelled for the girl to shut her mouth. He was caught, she thought joyfully. Now that he was one step away from hitting her, she was waiting for this action, deciding to push him and adding whether he was proud of his grandiose victory. Come on, pin him to the floor with your combat boot. The girl looked at him defiantly, saying, come on, what are you waiting for? She was already used to the pain, but he replied that her words were true. The girl's face changed, but he added that she had no right to utter them. His friends in arms, who defended the empire and the lives of people, died in the sky, and she only knows how to escape. If she does not know how to feel gratitude, then at least she should not insult. He bent down to her and harshly said that not everyone lives like she does, and he saw through her tricks. She tried to provoke him with her words. Rosen was indeed disheartened when he called her provocations and lies too limited for him. He squeezed out angrily. He wants compassion. Let him look for someone else. In response to her words that she did not lie, he pointed to her chains and said that the worst thing was that she did not realize the gravity of her crime and was chained in them in order to show how much she had fallen. The sin of taking the life of another person. His words would have been more painful if he had simply slapped him in the face. The girl could not believe that these words were being spoken by the same person she had seen on the leaflets. And then she hissed in her heart that he really was an idiot, to which Ian Connor stated that he fully understood what she was like. And he said that there would be no more personal conversations. Standing under the doors, she wondered what she expected. I remembered the words coming from the radio that if the air raid signal sounds, you need to go underground. They are protected. Closing her eyes, Rosen told herself that she had clearly listened to his voice, imagining that he would also talk to her. She seems to fall out of reality and falls into constant self-deception. Why did she constantly think of hearing his warm voice like from the radio then? Then the girl exploded and cursed. How infuriating he is. There's a hero walking around here. He's achieved everything. Do you think Ian Connor can break me? There will definitely be a chance, Rosen assured herself decisively and firmly. Her thoughts were interrupted by the mocking voice of Henry, who saw that she had wiped her face and tied up her hair. He caustically remarked that the only thing missing was red lipstick. Our heroine was not taken aback and replied that of course she would wear makeup. It's worth looking at her clean and tidy. Leading her to the cell, he asked what trick she had this time. The girl replied that it was a bottle of drinking water, which she saved to wash herself as a person should. Then, walking along the corridor, she decided to laugh at Henry, admitting her tricks. His curiosity played a role, and she winked, telling about women's secrets when a man and a woman are alone. He jumped up. Rosen lied to him that he liked her if he was courting her like that. Henry immediately broke down and began to sweat. Looking at him, the girl thought, why is Ian Connor not such an idiot like this? How easy it would be to influence him then. Henry behaved like a first grader. Rosen took pleasure in teasing him, and she grinningly offered to be friends. As they walked up the flight of stairs, she saw a girl she knew. It was Lyla playing on the stairs. Rosen frowned and thought that the girl was again left to her own devices. She looked at Henry, who wanted to get rid of her as quickly as possible by sending her to a prison cell, and thought that if you looked closely, she and Lyla were very similar. Suddenly, the girl stopped him, and with a serious look made it clear that she wanted to say something important. She then said that his niece was so cute and smiled slyly. Looking into the man's eyes, Rosen smiled ominously and said that her name was Lyla. Henry rolled his eyes in horror, turned pale. A trickle of sweat rolled down his face, and he croaked out what she had just said. In a trembling voice, he asked how she knew about his niece. The girl shrugged her shoulders and said that it was not at all difficult. She wanted to tease him more, but suddenly Henry turned to the girl and his keys fell. The girl stood with her back to them. It was not visible what she was doing. Rosen reassured him by saying, well, what could she do in handcuffs? He exhaled, saying that she was definitely a witch. Then a tirade began that he would bring her to light. She was definitely a witch, if only she tried to even touch a hair of Lyla. Suddenly, his scream almost deafened Rosen. He turned to the girl and shouted. Lyla blushed, wheezed, could not utter a word, held her hand to her throat, her eyes rolled back. Rosen looked at the baby in horror, wanted to say her name, but the words were stuck in her throat. The girl looked at them pleadingly, her eyes full of tears, her hands still holding her throat. Rosen realized that the girl had something stuck in her throat, and she began to call a doctor. She shouted at Henry, calling him an idiot, asking whether there was at least one doctor on the ship, but he fell into a stupor out of fear. Henry at that moment turned to himself, as if from the outside, asking him to come to his senses, but could not bring himself to move from the horror that he would lose his niece. Our heroine realized that he would be of no use. She began to scream and call for help, but there was no one. She tried feverishly to figure out what to do. As luck would have it, they were in the most deserted part of the ship. Suddenly, she remembered how Emily taught her first aid CPR, how she reluctantly watched the recordings and did not understand why she should delve into all this. Turning sharply to Henry, who stood like a mummy, she screamed for him to free her. The girl needed help. Remembering the notes of Emily, who argued that this can always be useful in life, because people die not only in war. Henry opened the shackles, and Rosen kept thinking how fragile a person is, how you can die for absolutely absurd reasons. She didn't understand why Emily worked so hard to learn these first aid skills and pass on the knowledge to others, because no one would know about her work. When Rosen ran to Lyla, Emily's words sounded in her head that one person cannot save the whole world. Not everyone is given the ability to master magic, but this knowledge may be needed at any time. People began to leave their cabins after hearing the noise. Rosen pulled out the object that was stuck in her throat using a technique that she had been taught. after which her legs gave way, and hugging the baby, she sat on the floor. She heard snatches of voices that the girl almost died. Thank God this girl made it in time. Lyla began to sob from extreme fear and stress, clinging to Rosen. Hugging the girl, Rosen thought that she had just saved this child. A sobbing Henry ran up and grabbed the girl in his arms. People echoed to each other what happened and how Rosen saved the baby. New passengers got out. Rosen's consciousness gradually began to clear, and the girl had something stuck in her throat. People looking at her were talking to each other about how they had seen her before, a familiar face. Suddenly, Rosen's gaze fell on a small object lying on the floor where she and Lyla were sitting. The girl took the little thing with her hands and saw that it was the candy that Lyla had choked on. She thought how strange it was that a bullet or candy could equally kill a person. Still sitting on the floor, she realized that not only the military is capable of saving or killing. How right Emily was when she passed on knowledge. The girl heard footsteps behind her. Someone was standing above her. Had this idiot finally come to his senses? Rosen said that her skill was also useful. If she wants to say thank you, let her give her water. Then she noticed that she could leave the package in the cell. Why was he silent there? When suddenly she saw Ian standing over her, who replied that he would do so. The girl asked, not knowing what to say, why he was here. He just looked at her. Rosen also looked into his eyes, trying to understand what was happening to him. Suddenly they heard a loud voice asking if Lyla was okay, and both turned their heads. The elderly man hugged the girl, and looking at them, it dawned on Rosen that this was the captain of the ship. Then she realized that Ian Connor was still standing next to her and told him that she had helped not for the sake of a reward, but that she had just said something about her request, to which he replied that such a reward was a mere trifle, adding that the army of the Empire always pays for a life saved, even if it is a criminal who will be imprisoned on the island of Monte. He held out the handcuffs to her to put them back on. Seeing her eyes, he said that it was necessary anyway. Rosen calmly agreed. When he put on the chains, she asked if he really would let her wash. Ian nodded in agreement, but he clarified that her hands should continue to be shackled. The girl was indignant about how she could wash herself with her hands tied, just douse herself with water, and that's it. A voice interrupted their dialogue and said that she could assign a servant to help. She could be a princess, although this should not have been in her destiny. These words were spoken by the captain of the ship, who stood behind them and heard the conversation. Ian turned his head when he saw the captain. Before he could say his name, he heard the captain scream. Captain Revel called Ian a mannerless bastard. Where are his manners, and did he teach him that the savior needs to be chained? She and Rosen were speechless from this. The girl thought that, wow, Grandpa. The captain came up and said that he had sent everyone to their rooms. Let him let this lady go at least for a while. After all, there is sea all around. Ian replied that it was impossible. The captain shouted that it was possible in general. Everything in the world is possible. Ian tried to remind him about the law, but the captain yelled that on this line the laws of land do not apply. Here he is, the law. Ian and Rosen stood like schoolchildren in front of the teacher. The captain continued that in front of him was his savior, Lyla. In any case, you can remove the shackles while he expresses gratitude. While the captain was indignant at how he could thank a man who was in shackles, Lila's contented face appeared from behind the captain. Rosen smiled and waved at the girl, while Ian tried to convince the captain that Rosen was a criminal. The captain put his hand on his granddaughter's head and affectionately said that, first of all, Rosen was a savior. Ian, on the contrary, convinced that, first of all, she was a criminal. The captain again attacked Ian, calling him a scoundrel who definitely needs to put in his 2 cents. The captain straightened up, addressing Rosen Lady Howes, ignoring Ian's buzzing that there was an order from above. There could be no exceptions. The girl was amazed how the captain warmly and fatherly expressed his gratitude to her and apologized for Ian's bad manners. He bowed to her and said that he forgot to introduce himself. He is now retired. And once he was an admiral in the Navy, he was a little embarrassed and added that maybe she had heard about Alex Revel. She definitely heard this name, but where? When suddenly it dawned on the girl that his bronze statue stood in the center of the Capitol. Everything was written on the face of Rosen, who was speechless and pointed her finger at him. to which the captain grinned and said that he was glad that she recognized him. When Rosen regained her ability to speak, she stuttered and said that of course she had heard his name. She remembered his portrait. He is a hero of the old war, whose name is known even to children who did not go to school like her. In turn, Rosen coughed seriously and said that she was neither a lady nor house. Her name was Rosen Walker. He asked permission to call the girl Miss Walker, and hugging Lyla, said that if it were not for Rosen, his only granddaughter would have died today. Then he seriously asked her how much he heard she would like to wash and eat. Rosen replied that she would be grateful if water and food were brought to the cell, and asked for meat. But the captain replied that this was impossible. The captain stated that it was not customary for the Rivel family to treat a benefactor this way, so if she has no plans for tomorrow evening, he invites her to dinner. Rosen stood dumbfounded, having just been invited by Captain Revel to a dinner party. The girl began to refuse, stuttering. She imagined in her imagination a dinner party in the form of huge ballrooms, special equipment, words, etiquette. The captain reassured her by saying that it was just dinner with his family. Rosen thought that this grandfather was grandiose in himself. The girl was surprised and grateful to such an invitation, but she was about to politely refuse when she heard Ian's voice. He said that this was already too much. In the end, it was he who faltered. But Rosen mentally repeated the killer, the witch, the commoner. Besides this, dirty and dangerous. That's how he saw her. Yes, he saw her exactly like that. A despicable murderer unworthy of sitting at a table with high and respected people. She thought about the poor and abandoned people, and hope once glimmered in her heart. And now he cannot say it, but he thinks of her as a murderer of the lower class of society. And therefore, the girl smiled at the captain and said that she would consider it an honor to accept such an invitation. And she innocently added, why refuse such an offer if she is always hungry? In addition, she assured that she would be able to eat, and with her hands shackled, the chances of escaping were negligible. Then, glancing at Ian, she continued to tell how Sir Connor kindly showed her the terrifying sea creatures of the ocean. Ian glanced nervously at her, wanted to add something, but remained silent. Rosen recalled how she was remarked that she was picking up leaflets with Sir Connor's image everywhere. She made excuses, but she was accused of addiction. Yes, that's true. He was her hero and idol. The main thing is that her husband does not see, but she carefully collected leaflets with his photo and pressed them to her chest. I didn't want to admit it to myself, but I was in love with this man. She had high hopes for him, and here, having personally encountered him, she understood how different he was from her imaginary image. Therefore, she began to get angry. She wanted him to remain the man from her dreams. Smiling radiantly and looking at Ian, she realized that life was always taking her somewhere, not where she wanted. Opening her eyes, Rosen could not understand where she was. She was surrounded by luxury and beauty. Stretching, she asked herself this must be paradise. A beautiful bed, a soft bed. It certainly didn't look like her camera, maybe a dream, which means you need to close your eyes and watch it further. She closed her eyes and decided to continue watching this wonderful dream when she heard footsteps. 3 maids entered, introducing themselves as Michaela, Louise, and Maya, saying that they had prepared a hot bath. Rosen, who understood little, was dragged from the bed and sat in the hot bath. Our heroine began to come to her senses, remembering the old captain who invited her to dinner. But Ian Connor didn't like it, and out of spite she agreed with him, and then she was brought to these royal apartments. Rosen closed her eyes, enjoying the warm water and enveloping aromatic foam. She didn't even remember how long it had been since she had taken a bath. The captain sent these people to help her. The girls apologized for their curiosity and asked if Rosen was really a witch. She grinned and asked if they believed in this nonsense. The maids laughed and answered that they didn't believe it. Just little Lyla was bragging about meeting a witch. Rosen agreed that children are gullible and often take things at face value. The maid poured more hot water for better comfort, although Rosen assured that everything was fine as is. When she was left alone in the hot bath, she thought that she did not want to get used to this warmth. The longer you were in the warmth, the more painful the cold wind felt. Such warmth had always been a luxury for her. Then she did not understand it and reached out for this warmth, rushed like a fool into his arms for the sake of this warmth. She won't let this happen again, so as not to experience pain and cold again. Lost in thought in the bath, she heard some voices. The girls were saying that this was unacceptable. When the maids said that they couldn't go there, a man's voice said that he didn't want to, but he had to watch. They tried to convince him of Sir Revel's order, and the man insisted that Sir Connor himself had given the order to guard. At that moment, everyone opened their mouths as Rosen, covering herself with a towel, came out and stood up, and Henry said let him say what he wants to say. Covering his eyes with his hand, he mumbled what she was doing. He was a man. When Henry gathered his courage and asked the maids to be left alone, seeing their frightened faces, he said that no more than a minute. The girls stood indecisive. He added that this was confidential information. Sir Connor ordered to convey it immediately. He was not stopped by the words of the maids to wait until the lady got dressed. In the end, they had to go out. Rosen asked what he wanted to say, or whether he would conduct a personal search. Henry immediately flared up and replied that she was naked. Why should he inspect her? He was not a pervert. Rosen said, "Who is he if he kicked the girls out and came into her right when she was bathing?" Our heroine smiled and said that he was a worthless liar. Henry blushed and tried to say something. Rosen added, "Well, why did you send your lieutenant at the moment when she was taking a bath? He came because he wanted to say something personal. The commander could order a guard at the door, but not at the bathroom. This is a secret conversation." Henry was silently embarrassed, realizing that he had been discovered. Rosen said that there is no need to hide behind the boss. Let him speak if he has something to say. The man wheezed that this concerned Lyla and shuffled around, not knowing how to continue. Finally, Rosen said that he was no good. He agreed. To somehow continue the conversation, Henry said that the baby was already fine. The doctor examined her. Rosen answered this well, but something was definitely not right. She asked if he really was a pilot and sat at the controls. The man replied that he had destroyed more than 50 enemy planes. When asked about his fearfulness, Henry said that he had an older sister who got married and gave birth to Lyla. Talking about the bombing in Ryo-Ryton, Rosen became sad. It was painful for her. Was she there at that moment? No, she was not. During the bombing, she made her first escape. I found out about everything when I was already in Al-Kafez, that Ryo-Ryton was no more. His brother-in-law, sister, and Lyla were there. The girl had just been born. Henry added that at first he also couldn't believe it, that the city was no longer there. Rosen listened silently. Henry's voice broke. How could a fairly large city disappear from the face of the earth? He continued to say that the funny thing was that he had the opportunity to stop this. He knew that his sister was there with her husband and child. Telling that he could not stop the bombing, Rosen did not want to know anything about it. It was all too difficult. Why couldn't she asked. Henry explained that that day they saw an enemy squadron. There were many of them. They could not cope with them all. Ian learned that they were heading towards Ryo-Ryton, the capital of the Malona Empire, and their native Ryotan were coming. Sir Connor had to make a choice, the capital or Ryo-Ryton, and the captain gave the order to Henry that they would defend the capital. Trembling, Henry said that the boss made the right choice. It was necessary, and he doesn't hold a grudge against him. So they spent the entire war on airplanes. He thought that he had overcome everything. But after the end, Henry could no longer sit in the cockpit of an airplane. And he really isn't who he used to be, but Lyla is here with him, so it's okay. Rosen, after some reflection, said that he hated her because she, being a criminal from Ryo-Ryton, survived while his innocent sister died there. The man nodded. The girl's look became sad, and she replied that this deserves hatred. Let him continue to hate. Everything is fine. People always need a hero to admire like Ian Connor. And the one you can hate, they are like two sides of the coin, hero and witch. Her thoughts were again interrupted by Henry, who said that he had come to apologize. Apologize for pestering her, and for showing the monsters by luring him with fillet of meat. Oh, that's it. It wasn't Connor's idea. Be that as it may, if it weren't for Rosen, Lyla would have suffered, and for that he is very grateful to her. At this time, Ian stood at the door, hearing the maids whispering. Was it really worth leaving them alone? He opened the door and walked in. The maids looked at each other in fear. Once again expressing his gratitude, Henry heard a splash of water. Rosen looked out from behind the screen with a conspiratorial smile and asked if he had come to her empty-handed. Henry muttered that he sincerely came to say thank you, and there was no need to spoil the atmosphere, to which the girl replied that she was not joking. Rosen said that he needed to prove his sincerity, and not just thank him. Henry hesitated and said that he could give her money, but what would she do with it? Rosen exhaled and said that she needed to be more flexible, looking at the keys hanging on his belt. When the hint reached him, the man said that he would never do it. And it's not that he's not grateful, his position obliges him. Rosen added that if he thinks that the problem is that she is a prisoner, what if she did not kill or did endure hundreds of times, snapped, and killed? He did not want to listen further. Rosen continued to talk about the reasons that prompted her. They again began to have a verbal spat. She said that she never lies. Henry reminded that she herself said that she did not save Lyla because of the reward. Rosen then proudly replied that it was true, but he himself came to her and made her proud. Then she calmed him down, saying that she would forget about the keys. And besides, she wouldn't survive in the ocean anyway. Then, beckoning him with her finger and smiling slyly, she asked him to come closer. He began to resist. Then the girl grabbed him by the sleeve. At this time, the shadow of Connor moved towards the bathtub, who heard the hum of voices but could not hear what was happening. Henry asked what she wanted. Rosen replied that it was nothing, just a small request. Ian stood outside the door, and it seemed to him that he heard Rosen asking Henry if he would do this for her. Turn the knob, and he is in the bathroom. Rosen and Henry are standing close to each other. Ian loudly asks his subordinate what he is doing. Henry turned white as a sheet. He began to stutter confusedly. He wanted to ask how the boss ended up here. Ian's icy eyes bored into his subordinate, and he once again coldly asked what he was doing. Rosen stood and looked at them. Not knowing what to do, she herself was confused. Ian came down hard on Henry, saying that he had better give him a clear explanation right now. As a result, he was unable to say anything, and Ian yelled at him to rush around. Then he approached Rosen and handed her a blanket and told her to sit down on the couch for a while. Wrapped in a blanket, she looked at him, not understanding anything, with her eyes wide open. Ian stood, and his thoughts were confused about who she was and how, but he didn't say anything out loud. Rosen wondered why he was still standing over her like that, and they would be like this for a long time. Then Ian began to shift from foot to foot and put his hand on his head. Not knowing how best to ask, he finally spoke insinuatingly, asking if Henry had done something to her against her will. Rosen, not understanding anything, continued to look at him. Next, he asked the question whether Henry tried to force her, whether he touched her body without permission. When the girl realized it, she jumped up and screamed, "Of course not! What is he talking about?" Ian said that she could tell him everything as it is, and he could change her guard all the way to Monty, and no one could get close to her. Rosen asked if Henry wasn't his lieutenant. Ian seriously said that if he did something to Rosen, then he's gone. But the girl said, "He's a hero like you, and she's a witch." Ian asked what she meant by this. The girl clarified in surprise that he does not trust his own subordinates, even people like Henry. How did he go through the war then? Ian replied that he sincerely hates such things, and people are unpredictable. Even if Henry is a good subordinate, this does not mean that he is flawless. He continued to look at her as if she were a victim of circumstances, and tried to read her face to see if anything had happened. Rosen realized that it was necessary to dispel this misunderstanding, otherwise she would even feel ashamed, and replied that nothing had happened. They were just chatting. Ian still suspiciously asked what they were chatting about. The girl explained that Henry was embarrassed to thank her in front of everyone for saving Lyla. She smiled and said, why would she do anything if she didn't get anything? Not understanding what exactly she could get, the girl smiled and hinted at what the prisoner could get from the warden and vice versa. Ian replied that he did not understand how everyone fell for her lies. She was still only looking for the right opportunity. Then Rosen said seriously and sadly if he wanted to know the reason, she was not deceiving anyone. They just pretend to be deceived. It doesn't matter whether she can lie or not. Everyone hears only what they want to hear, but no one needs the truth. Everyone needs a scapegoat whom they can safely curse from the heart. Smiling sadly, the girl finished that what she says doesn't matter. Her words will never change anything, but one thing is clear. He is a true hero. Surprise and some embarrassment flashed in Ian's eyes. The girl continued. He has a heightened sense of justice, since he cares about some prisoner like her. Ian was amazed that she also considered him a hero. Rosen grinned. What was strange about that? It's strange that someone like her could admire someone like Ian, but she liked him. She was also a citizen of the Empire, no matter how angry he was. And she collected his photos that fell from the sky. Ian asked if she collected his photos. Rosen said, "What's wrong with this? Doesn't he himself know what's going on?" But Ian apparently didn't understand. And the girl laughed and blurted out that he was handsome. Didn't he realize it? Then she blushed at what she had just blurted out. She felt embarrassed and said that it was time for her to get dressed. She should already take poor Henry and leave. She asked the girls to come in and reassured her that she wouldn't knock them out or run away. He could be standing outside the door. And she also put on the shackles as expected, when suddenly she did not expect further action. Suddenly she saw his hand extended to her. It was unexpected. Not knowing how to react to this, the girl could not take her eyes off the hand. Ian said that he was not angry. He was just confused. Rosen was embarrassed, and he reminded her of her words that they were the same. He thinks it's true. They are similar in some ways. She was confused, falling into a stupor. They are similar to him. Remember when you said that? This is where they look alike. My consciousness is completely clouded. He said that she had to go. The girl did not understand where. He reminded her that it was time to get dressed and go to the long-awaited dinner. Her hand itself reached out to his hand. Her hand lay in his hand. Thoughts flashed that she needed to go. Then everything stopped. He pulled her towards him. They were so close. Rosen's breath caught. The very next minute, he put her on his shoulder and carried her. The girl was indignant. She was like a sack of potatoes. Ian said that he was sorry, but it was really necessary. She asked to call the girls. Ian calmly said, why would he trust her, and continued, he knows what she was up to. Initially, there was no need to listen to the captain. She said, and to Henry, even if he was watching her, Ian gloomily replied that now he couldn't trust him either. Taking the shackles to put them back on the prisoner, he said that he would control everything himself. He told her to hold out her hands. It seemed like he was being too discourteous to her. Rosen indignantly wanted to blurt out when he was even polite to her, but Ian replied that she saved the child, and Lyla revel at that. Looking with narrowed eyes, he listed Henry, the captain, Lyla, the crew. He is the only person whose heart has not yet trembled in front of her. Rosen blurted out, so he's afraid that she might run away. It's not for nothing that she carries a gun with her. Ian nodded, but he didn't say out loud that he was afraid of her, and it was true. The girl scared him, or rather, what he began to feel for her. He told her that he was afraid that they were similar in some ways. Rosen did not understand, but in what place? Why? When he brought her into the room, the slightly frightened maids were already waiting. Rosen glared at Ian and thought that she needed to be afraid of him. He has all the control. He turned away, leaving the door ajar, and lit a cigarette while the girls dressed her. What is he really afraid of? It's absurd that the prisoner was given a first-class cabin. Nothing should happen. There are veteran guides here, and Henry, by the way. His report. He went into the office and took the papers with Henry's report. How much there was. Ian worriedly sorted through the papers. There must be something under it where. He saw a folded piece of paper. He clearly gave the order to burn it. Ian took a drag from his cigarette, remembering the pile of newspapers with publications about Rosen Walker. In the newspapers, with a red pen, any mention of Rosen Walker, who she was, where she had escaped from, was noted. These newspapers were collected in a magazine, which had already become thick. At first, it was entertainment, a hobby with which he tried to kill time. But then it turned into addiction, even obsession. After the war, he had the same dream, a nightmare in which he and the plane were drowning in the water. He woke up from this nightmare. He tried to convince himself that everything was fine with him. No one should have known about this. You can't break down. He's a symbol of victory. They believe in him. Every time a nightmare overtook him, he grabbed the newspaper. He needed something to fill his head with. Until the eye caught the mention of Ryoritan, which he had to abandon. No one in the article mentioned his name, the fact that he abandoned him to his fate. And then a certain villain, a witch, comes to the front pages, replacing Ian Connor. the image of a witch created by journalists, the government, and the military. When he saw the mention of Rosenhaus, it was as if he had been under the influence of witchcraft. He looked for mentions of this prisoner in the newspapers, circled them with a red pen, and made clippings. It was as if she was another side of his personality, the same desperate loser. But even though they were both equally unlucky, why did she become an evil witch, and he became a hero who saved the country? A man who took one life out of malice, and a man who was forced to kill 15,623 people. Is there any way to determine the weight of sin? Whose sin would be heavier? He immersed himself in reading notes about her, dreaming only that she would run faster, so that only she would survive. Whether she is a witch or not, whether she really killed or was slandered, she is the only one he saved and who survived Raya. He sat at the table and thought, if someone saw his thoughts, the war hero empathizes with the prisoner, and whatever, he became obsessed with her. Suddenly Lyla came in, apologizing for disturbing him. She was holding a bunch of toys. Seeing the toys, he asked what it was all about. The girl replied that she wanted to make a gift for Rosen in the evening, but did not know what to choose, whether he could help. Looking at the newspaper in front of him, Lyla added, because he knows Rosen better than anyone. Before he had time to ask why him, the girl pointed her finger at the magazine, saying, this is right. Ian asked how long she had known about this. He felt very embarrassed, but the girl answered without surprise. What's wrong with that? Now you can collect everything related to Rosen. Moreover, Lyla herself was looking for newspapers to put together an album, but someone cut out the photo. Everything. Ian sat her on his lap, and trying to speak as softly as possible, asked if she had told anyone about this. The girl honestly answered that she had not told anyone, not even her uncle. He asked Lyla not to tell anyone about this. The girl asked if he could have problems because of this. He replied that yes. Ian explained that she was a prisoner, and his duty was to escort them. Then Lyla assured him that no one would find out. Lyla then said that she always thought that he hated Rosen, and that everyone probably thought so. Ian explained to her that he had no hatred for the prisoners. He was just doing his job, and he should not have feelings for them. Moreover, she saved her. If he was rude to her before, then this will not happen again. The girl trustingly asked if this meant that he liked Rosen. He remained silent and replied that no. Then Lyla asked if she could like Rosen. He began to explain that Rosenhauers. The girl interrupted him and said that she knew that she had killed her husband. And she added, but she also saved her, which means she covered up the bad with the good. And now she might like Rosen. Ian was holding back with all his might. Lyla asked to choose a gift. Even despite Ian's assurance that she would have to give things away in prison, they chose a bear, and then Lyla shared her special coin with him, explaining that he needed it more. He guessed where she got it from, and the girl said that it was a magic coin, and Rosen gave it to her. Ian sternly told her not to dare take anything from Rosen anymore. Tears welled up in Lyla's eyes. He took the coin, promising that he would take care of it, and said that both she and he needed to change clothes. When the girl asked where Uncle Henry was, he replied that Rosen was guarding in the corridor. As she left, the little girl replied that he was not in the corridor. Ian had a picture and words before his eyes, where Henry and Rosen were in a hurry so that Ian wouldn't see them. She could go through anything, even with the jailers. He didn't hear the knock, and as a pale Henry came in, he tried to push away the thoughts of why he was so angry in general, why he was so annoyed by Henry, who begged him to believe that they were just talking. Ian sat stone-faced. He had to bury his feelings, then told Henry that his actions were causing a threat to both Rosen and himself, while Rosen was getting dressed, and she heard their loud voices. The maid added admiringly that she could go out. How beautiful she was. Everyone would be amazed. Rosen couldn't help herself and take a step. The maid pushed her, saying that she really didn't know how beautiful she was now. Entering the office in a beautiful emerald dress, gloves, emerald shoes that matched the color of the dress, with beautifully styled hair and in shackles, Rosen felt awkward. When Ian and Henry saw her, Ian tried to hide his expression, and Henry, with his eyes wide open, could not take his eyes off Rosen. She stood in front of them. He looked. Rosen didn't know where to go from looking at her, not understanding whether she looked funny or good. In the end, she offendedly asked why they were both staring at her. Henry apologized and asked who she was. Rosen thought that Henry had decided to tease her. She said that she would give him up now anyway. She would go to prison for life. But he gasped and admitted that he really didn't recognize her. Then Rosen coquettishly said that she had told him before that she was worth looking at. The man assured that now she was like a real lady. Rosen sincerely thanked Henry for the compliment, and Henry and Ian were dressed in festive costumes. But why did Ian just stare and remain silent? Rosen thought that maybe he couldn't see clearly, when she suddenly heard someone turn to her with Lady Walker's words and extend her hand. Henry bowed politely and asked permission to accompany her. God, Henry, you made my heart flutter, Rosen thought. He's quite gallant. She added sarcastically, and whether he was going to push her away later and say that she stinks, Henry added as best he could. Rosen flirtatiously said that she would probably trust him, thinking that this guy was very handsome. Suddenly, Ian blocked Rosen with himself, telling Henry that Henry was making excuses. Hadn't they sorted out this misunderstanding? He said that they sorted it out, but in another sense he could not trust him, since excessive friendliness and excessive hostility are equally dangerous. Henry was shocked that Ian really thought that he would free Walker and let her escape. Ian, looking at Rosen, said that he had some reason to think so, and added to himself how he could know what they agreed on in the bathroom. Henry began to make excuses again. Rosen simply asked him to tell the chef to prepare one dish that she would like to try. Oh, you bastard, Rosen thought. How could you say yes? She confirmed. The girl did not have time to answer the question of what dish it was. At that moment, there was a knock. Ian did not have time to receive an answer and turned around. The captain and Lyla came in. The girl was delighted with the sight of Rosen. Rosen waved to her, thinking that Lyla would also be at dinner. Apparently, she was able to persuade her grandfather. Lyla enthusiastically said that Rosen was just like a real princess. The girl was pleased to hear such a sincere compliment, and she said that Lyla was also like a princess. The girl wanted to approach, but Ian said to take a step back. She just wanted to thank her, but Sir Connor was adamant. Lyla had to move away. Everyone felt awkward, and Rosen thought that she was merciless even towards children. Then the captain exploded, calling Ian a wary boy. He was the king of this ship. Ian replied that Rosen Howarth was a cold-blooded criminal. The argument would probably have continued, but then they said that food had been served. The captain, realizing that Rosen's shackles would not be removed, ordered Henry to help her during dinner. Ian came forward and said that he could and would help personally. Everyone looked at him dumbfounded. He asked what was wrong with it if he were to help. Rosen had no objections. Then everything was decided, and Ian took her hand to lead her to the table. He held her just below the elbow. She looked at his face. Strange. His gaze. It was not like the look that looked at her from the very beginning. It may seem like it, but those gray eyes linger on her longer than usual. He wrapped his hand around her hand below the shackles, and she sadly thought that this was all just an obsession. This obsession simply gives her the opportunity to escape the harsh reality, but his eyes, their color, are very complex, through which it is impossible to discern his character. If she doesn't stop, she will collapse and forget about the goal. But it was stronger than her. And then the girl felt her hand lying in his hand. Rosen asked him how long he planned to hold her hand. Ian caught himself and was embarrassed. He muttered that he just wanted to pull the chain. Rosen was indignant at the expression of pulling the chain. Captain Revel flared up that he was discourteous to the lady. Ian began to make excuses that he didn't do it on purpose, but it didn't look particularly convincing. Looking at her, he explained that he sincerely thought it was a chain. The girl snorted and said that she knew there was no need to make excuses. She thought sadly that she knew very well that this gesture meant nothing. It was just her illusion. These phrases from the radio and on leaflets, "I will always protect you," were impossible. But she believed these lies because she needed to believe in something. Yes, it was her fantasy in which she was unrequitedly in love with him. Stupid Rosen. At the moment when you need to be extremely cold-blooded, you cannot raise your eyes to him. She stood embarrassed, not knowing where to put her eyes, as if they were suspected of something awkward. Ian was still making excuses that he wasn't hinting at anything. Don't let her misunderstand. She tried to pretend that it didn't hurt her at all. She said, "What do you need to understand? She's not a fool. I will definitely protect you." These words sounded in my head. Rosen tried her best to pull herself together. Entering the hall, the girl involuntarily whistled, then apologized. Everything was so pompous. The captain was good-naturedly glad that she was impressed. The captain said that he himself does not often have dinner like this. Usually, only official receptions are held this way. The table was set. Everything was ready. The captain suggested starting dinner. They pulled out a chair for her, and sitting down at the table, the girl asked why, while they were walking, she didn't see a single person. The captain replied that it would look outrageous to the public to treat a prisoner in such a way. Rosen's gaze immediately fell on the soup. The girl reached for a spoon, forgetting about everything. Henry said how she was going to eat in handcuffs, and the captain had not yet given his consent to start eating. Rosen was embarrassed, saying that he had just given permission. Henry patiently explained that this is not the same. We need to wait until the other dishes are served. His words about how she had previously eaten with a hint that she did not know something so obvious made the girl blush. How could she know? She was not an aristocrat and had never been at such a table. Suddenly she heard her name, and Ian handed her a spoon and said, "If she wants, let her eat. If she wants to eat." Lyla liked that they got along so well, and she asked for a spoon for herself. Ian, while feeding Rosen's soup, scolded Henry. He himself did not observe much etiquette on the battlefield. Ian became even more angry at the awkward excuses, ordering him to move away from the girl and not talk to her. Chewing Rosen asked why he doesn't eat himself, to which the man replied, "Let her not think about him and eat herself." The girl asked for meat. She looked at Connor's face. It's funny, he looks stern, but his movements are so soft. Rosen was in euphoria from the food. She devoured it without ceasing to admire how delicious everything was. She asked for one piece, then a piece of another dish. Everyone watched the girl a little dumbfounded. Ian, spoon-feeding her, told her to eat slowly, otherwise her stomach would hurt. Rosen puffed out her cheeks, saying that he was disgusted to watch her. He asked not to turn his words around, calmly explaining that if her stomach hurts, it will only be worse for her if her stomach hurts. She asked why such a contorted face. He replied that this was his usual facial expression. Everyone present completely agreed with this. Rosen, looking at him, wondered why he continued to talk. Yes, she was the first to start, but he could have simply ignored her. While pricking another piece, he asked if she had been a nurse before. Rosen nodded negatively. Where did she get such knowledge in first aid? There aren't many like that throughout the country. Then he suspiciously asked if she had used magic. Rosen chuckled and replied that if a woman did something impressive, she would immediately be accused of witchcraft, adding that she was not a nurse, but her husband was a doctor, although he was a charlatan without a license. But by watching him, you could learn something. However, Hindley really was married to a real witch, although she herself was not a witch, but Emily was. There was an awkward silence. Everyone suddenly fell silent. She thought maybe they realized that she was a killer. She was angry with Ian. This asshole ruined the whole atmosphere. Why ask what they already wrote about? Then the captain spoke, apologizing for his question. How old was she? Each newspaper wrote differently. They had no faith. Some claimed that she was 70 and looked young with the help of magic. Rosen replied that she was 25 years old, as the Imperial newspaper wrote. Then he spoke, and she got married and fell silent, then exclaimed at the age of 15. He clarified that she got married so early at the insistence of her parents. The girl innocently replied that no, straight from the orphanage. Henry slammed his fist on the table, yelling, "Have they gone crazy? A 15-year-old girl is getting married." Taking another piece into her mouth, Rosen replied, "What difference does it make? Her husband is already dead anyway." Everyone stopped. There was deathly silence. Rosen thought, damn, she didn't plan this. Ian broke the silence. "Stop talking about nonsense. Lyla is here." The girl said that it was okay. She also read articles about Rosen, and before she could finish speaking, Ian interrupted her and said to just eat. But the girl still agreed that Rosen killed her husband. He stopped her. The girl sadly said that there was a chance that Rosen did not kill him. Ian said, like a monolith, that this had been officially established. Everyone sat embarrassed. Only Ian said that Howarth saved her life, but the truth is that she killed her own husband. The girl replied that it was all sad. It was sad that no one believed Rosen. She cried, saying that it would be very bad for her if no one believed her like that. Rosen couldn't take it anymore and told Ian to stop pushing Lyla and just let her eat. He, in turn, answered why she gave her the coin, remembering what kind of coin she was talking about. The girl got her bearings and said that this coin originally belonged to Lyla. She just played with it and gave it back to the girl. She understood that he wanted to tell her that she was a liar. Lyla, still crying, confirmed that it was indeed a lucky coin. Rosen was not lying, and Rosen thought how sometimes a lie successfully becomes the truth. She reassured the girl, thinking that children were naive and therefore could be easily manipulated. Lyla watched, no longer crying, and Rosen thanked Lyla for protecting her. The maid came up and asked if she could clear the plates to serve the next course. Rosen sat in anticipation of what the next wonderful dish would be served. There was so much on the table. Ian asked her if she wanted to try any of these dishes. She saw the bright berries and asked for Myeria. Ian cut the fruit in half and took the juicy pulp into a spoon, bringing it to the girl's mouth and offering to try it. Rosen squeezed the chair with one hand and took the berry into her mouth. The last word she heard from the captain, who asked if she was okay with everything. She was silent. Ian said that she was asked a question. As his eyes widened in horror, he saw drops of blood on the carpet. Rosen clutched her throat. Blood dripped from her lips. Her pupils dilated. The girl could not answer. Everything swam before her eyes. She heard her name, thinking, "Great." Everything worked out. Her hand in the bloody glove hung limply. My last thought was that it was a pity that Lyla saw this horror. But there was no other way out. She shouldn't go to jail. Now she knew for sure there was no savior. If she wants to be saved, she must do it herself. Ian must do as she planned. She was already losing consciousness when Ian, with frightened eyes, shouted her name, even if she thought about letting her guard down for a second. They tried to calm Ian down. He asked if it was poisoning. Rosen was placed on the sofa and given first aid. She was unconscious. Ian said that she started coughing up blood after trying the berry. The man agreed, but it was not poison. He rushed straight to the screams. The atmosphere was serious. The captain shouted that a poisoner was hiding on his ship, and the soldier who saw him off completely wilted. He meant Henry. Connor stood cold as a rock. There were drops of blood on his dress suit. The man thought that for Sir Connor, understandably, the mission was very important. Ian asked if it wasn't the poison. What was it then? The man said that most likely it was the peculiarities of the girl's body. Apparently, she has a serious allergy to some foods, because the rest of the food is fine and no one else got sick. Ian asked if Rosen ate the fruit on purpose. The man replied that he couldn't say for sure. Either she didn't know anything and it just happened that way, or she did it on purpose, given that she was being sent to Monty Island for life. Ian looked at Rosen and wondered if this could be a suicide attempt, the worker added. Perhaps she decided that it was better to die than to go to the island. He asked if Rosen would die. The man who helped said that she was not dying. She was just unconscious. She was helped. Ian touched her cheek with his hand, asking why she did not come to her senses. The man replied that her body was very weakened due to malnutrition. She did not have enough energy to come to her senses. It may be that she will not regain consciousness. The worker replied that he could not say for sure. But she is a prisoner who has been through a lot. Many die in the cells for no apparent reason. She could die from another disease, Ian heard, a feeling beyond his control taking over his mind. He looked at Rosen, and the thought flashed through his head that he might die. Turning away, he tried to pull himself together, when at that moment a thin voice called him. Lyla looked at him with eyes full of tears and begged him not to send Rosen to the cell. She heard the conversation. He said nothing, turning away, but the girl grabbed his leg and babbled, crying, that Rosen was very sick and would die in the cell. She could rest a little. Suddenly he put his hand on the girl's head, looked at Rosen, and gave the order to move her to the cabin. When he named his cabin, everyone's eyes widened at him. The man asked if he was sure that he wanted the prisoner to be in his cabin, but Ian replied that he definitely shouldn't worry about him. Ian said that Rosen Walker was entrusted to him and he would personally look after her. The chief's words flashed through his head that he was tasked with escorting prisoners to Monty Island, and especially carefully monitoring Rosen Walker. He looked at Rosen and thought that he had long forgotten the essence of his task. Now this is something personal, something he tried so hard to get rid of but failed. He asked himself the same question. Why is he so worried about her? She is a murderer, and he is the one who is dragging her to a hell worse than death. Thoughts flashed through Rosen's mind. How she told him that he was her hero. So she remembers how she woke up when she was hurt for the first time. Emily looked after her. The girl asked if she was dying, but she said that everyone is born with their own characteristics of the body. For some, even ordinary medicines can be poisonous, and so can foods. Placing a wet bandage on her head, she explained that you need to be careful, paying attention to the food you eat and what medications make you feel unwell. She almost died then. Emily asked if Rosen remembered what medicine made her feel bad. Looking at Emily and trying to remember, Rosen remembered her childhood years. She remembered that the director of the orphanage had a habit of drinking purple berry compote. It always began to seem to her that everything itched even if she was just nearby. Then Emily said that she should never eat these berries. Otherwise, next time she might actually die. Rosen asked the name of the berries, and Emily said Myeria. She remembered the name. But every time life became unbearable, this name popped up in her head. She thought, didn't she deserve at least a peaceful death by suffocation? It was better than being killed by Hinley. But this time, everything is different. If she was going to die, she would not suffer for the sake of escaping from prison. Rosen came to her senses. The light was falling on her. She could not figure out where she was. She sat up in bed and realized that it had happened in a cabin, not in a prison cell.